So I'd say the first piece of technology I used within research was probably a camera, because I decided to film my focus group, and this is just because it's easier to film and to see people's responses and their body language. It gave us a more in-depth understanding of how they were responding. Also, I think filming an interview just allows the participant to feel more at ease, and they felt like they could talk more, you know, there was no restrictions on what they could say or how much they could say, like they would be in a questionnaire. And also we could ask supplementary questions because we used a semi-structured style of interview. I would say that this is an effective use of technology because I then also used Adobe Premiere Pro to edit the focus group together, which meant that we could cut it down and it wasn't just one big piece of footage. As well as the focus group, I thought it would be useful to get a larger sample and get some more quantitative data. I sent out a form for this. I used Google Docs, and I feel like this was quite an effective piece of technology because the program itself actually put like graphs, and it would turn all the responses into statistics that I could actually use within my research. I could easily send it out, get people to fill it in, and there was no hassle. Like the whole process was very quick, easy and simple, so I would say that it was a very good use of technology there. So one of the main methods of presenting my research was Prezi. I really liked the use of Prezi for tasks where I would have one main theme and then different sub-themes. So for example, I used Prezi for my director research because within each director I would also have sub-themes of like examples of their work and what they're known for, that sort of thing. And I just feel like this is a much more engaging method of presenting my work and a more visually appealing one. It presents everything in a coherent way, an organised way, but also it links the relevant aspects of the task together. So I found SlideShare, PowerPoint and eMaze really useful for tasks that could be quite easily divided into subsections. So for instance, the regulation task, I just used a number of different headings and questions. So what is regulation and the history of regulation, and then some case studies. So there were no real subsections because everything was sort of its own individual topic within regulation. I found that a more logical, coherent, chronological format would be better for that. To reflect on my use of technology within research, I would say that I could have more carefully considered this. For example, I think that tasks like funding would have been better suited to Prezi because I could have had independent artists on one side and then established artists on the other, and I could have done something a bit more visually interesting with that. I think I perhaps could have taken more consideration into which software was most appropriate for each task within research. In general, I relied heavily on the internet, on secondary sources, aside from my audience research, and I used a range of different software to present this. So I used Scribd a lot during my planning, and that's just because I felt like the planning tasks needed a more formal approach. So for instance, the proposal, I felt like, you know, I was setting out everything that I wanted to do in my production, and obviously when you're writing a proposal, you know, it's quite a formal document, so I just felt like laying it out in a Word document would be best. However, looking back on that, I actually would change it and I would maybe do it in a video, you know, present my ideas a bit more visually. Yeah, I just think that it would be nicer to change that process a little bit to engage the person that I'd be presenting it to. But saying that, I also used SlideShare again and eMaze for a lot of my planning tasks, and I think these were quite useful for instance, the casting profiles, where, you know, on PowerPoint I could do a different slide for each character profile and each casting profile. Overall, I think that I could have improved my planning by maybe branching out on the software I use, really just changing up a bit from the research, I think. For production, we used a Sony a7X II camera to film our entire production. I think this was actually one of our most effective uses of technology. So the camera was quite perfect for what we wanted. It was really high quality, and the ability to use manual focus meant that we could really make sure that we were focusing on our actor Sam, especially in the room when we needed quite a few close-ups. We made sure that everything was very clearly in focus, and we could manipulate the depth of the focus, suit the shot. most importantly, I think the camera had a built-in stabilisation feature. A lot of our shots were handheld because we wanted to create a sort of feeling of instability, especially in the room in which the character was trapped. We really wanted that to be quite shaky, quite unstable. We wanted that to be conveyed, so we used handheld camera work. I think that without the stabilisation this might have just been a bit too shaky. We felt like adding stabilisation afterwards in Premiere or After Effects, we felt like sometimes that can just make it a bit too unnatural. So of course we also used a tripod for some shots. We used this mainly for the memories because these were all quite stable. We wanted the stability of the shots to reflect the stability of the relationship at the time. We did use a glide cam for one particular shot. It was when the characters are on the sofa, and we sort of just wanted to try this out because we felt like it's quite nice and smooth. We thought it could create quite a nice effect. Reflecting on it, I'm not sure that it was really necessary, although I was quite pleased with how the shot turned out and I think it looks quite nice. I'm not sure how much the technology, the glide cam, actually contributed towards that. I think that a very similar, if not almost the same shot could have been recreated without using it. Although it didn't hinder our production, I don't really think it improved it. And lastly, the last piece of technology we used was the newer CN160 light, and this was attached to the top of the camera for some shots, and then for some shots we had another person holding it. So we only used this in shots of the room in which the character was trapped. It was quite effective. I think that it was definitely useful in those shots because obviously we had no other lights in the room, and it was all very low-key lighting, and we wanted to keep it that way. We wanted to manipulate the focus of the light to really pinpoint an object that he's looking at and highlight them. Because of that, we couldn't keep it on the camera the whole time, and I think that having two people operating equipment, being as there were only 3 of us in the group, it meant that there was only one person observing, directing, and I think that that might have been a bit of a hindrance to our production. So perhaps to improve, we could have somehow overcome that, maybe used a different light, one that was on a stand. The light was very strong, very bright, and it just sort of created the effect we were looking for. So to improve, I think that we could have used perhaps 2 cameras simultaneously to capture different angles of the same shot. But saying this, we did try this in our AS production, but the 2 cameras responded slightly differently to the light, and then there was a difference in quality, so that that did take away from continuity and verisimilitude. If we could have overcome that, if we could have used the same cameras, manipulated the light to make sure that it was similar in both shots, I think that having more than one camera would have been quite useful to our production. Post-production, we only really used Adobe Premiere Pro, and we used this for the vast majority of editing. So we put all the clips into a timeline, and then after our first draft we would colour code the ones that we were going to refilm and change. And I think this was a really effective way of using the technology because it showed us exactly what we needed to change, and then we could go from there, work out how we were going to change it. When it came to editing our second draft, it was a lot easier to just insert those clips, and we knew exactly where they needed to go, and it just sped up the whole process so much, so I think that was really effective. We also added any transitions, so there is, for instance, a fade to black. We found the software really straightforward to use because we all had experience with it. One thing that we were less experienced with was colour correction, and so this was quite interesting to experiment with because we wanted to decrease the saturation and increase the fade on the memories to sort of give that nostalgic, sentimental feeling to it. Our real concern with editing was that we wouldn't be able to successfully convey the fact that that there's a distinction between the memories and the past and the present. Audience feedback, everyone seemed to understand the general storyline, that everyone picked up on the concept of it being memories, and so I would say that we were very successful with this. So for the production of my ancillary tasks, I mainly relied on Photoshop, InDesign and Lightroom. So I started off by taking the pictures on a Canon camera, and then I put them straight onto the computer and began with image manipulation. I started off with Lightroom so I could just change things like shadows, highlights, warmth because I wanted my images to feel quite undersaturated, quite low-key. Lightroom was perfect for that because it just allowed me to really simply drag the different settings up and down and create the overall tone that I wanted. I took the images straight into Photoshop, and this was just more manipulation of them, and I also was able to perfect the skin of the actor, the model in the image, which just gave it that sort of airbrushed, perfect look that is conventional of posters and digipacks. From here I took it into InDesign, I added the font, I put it all together to create the final digipack and the final poster. I was actually quite surprised by how simple this was. Although I wasn't experienced with programs like Photoshop and InDesign, I am satisfied with how I've used it. And I think that I did quite effectively use it. I used each piece of software for the specific parts of the task that it was most appropriate. So in order to build on what I learned from research and planning, I tried to sort of vary the software I used. So I used PowerPoint, Prezi, and then I did videos for audience feedback, and of course this question is a video. So I just think that makes it a little bit more engaging and a little bit more interesting in comparison to my research and planning. To conclude, I'm quite pleased with my use of technology throughout this portfolio, this production. I think that I could have perhaps varied it slightly more, and I could have maybe, you know, branched out with the software I used. But overall I'm satisfied that I've broadened my skills, but at the same time I've done what's best for the specific tasks, the specific productions.